She ruled without mercy, until she heard the humans reason the stars stretched endlessly across the dark sky, a vast canvas that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires countless times. In the midst of that expanse, a massive spacecraft hovered like a jagged mountain against the blackness, its hull gleaming with cold silver and blue lights. Within its corridors, order and discipline ruled every moment, and every whisper carried the weight of fear. Empress Valera walked through her chamber, her long robes swaying with each step, her face serene but sharp, as if carved from crystal. Her eyes, a pale shade of ice, scanned the reports before her with the patience of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her empire was vast, spanning systems and star clusters, and every world within it had learned to obey. Valera had earned her reputation not through charm or diplomacy, but through absolute rule. No disobedience was tolerated, no weakness forgiven. She had watched countless rebellions crumble before her without shedding a drop of blood herself. The subjects who survived learned quickly that mercy was not part of the Empress's vocabulary. Yet today there was something different in the air, though the chamber remained silent. The advisors who usually followed her closely, bowing and murmuring in unison, were restless. They shuffled papers and whispered behind their screens, glances darting nervously toward Valera. Her latest decree, one that would claim the resources of a small neutral planet, had caused ripples across the council. Some feared the planet's inhabitants might resist, even though Valera's strength had made resistance almost unthinkable. "Your Majesty," one of the senior advisors began, his voice tentative, "the humans, a representative has arrived from the neutral system. They request an audience." Valera's eyes lifted from the holographic map. "A human," she said softly, almost amused. Her voice carried no anger, no fear, only a calm curiosity. She had dealt with many species, and humans were considered weak, unpredictable, and above all, insignificant by her empire. Many of her advisors had warned against their interference, but Valera had never worried about a species so small, so fragile in comparison to the strength of her fleets. "Humans are unpredictable," another advisor said, bowing slightly. "They are clever, but they are not soldiers or rulers. Your Majesty, perhaps you should reconsider." Valera's eyes narrowed. "Reconsider?" she repeated. "I do not reconsider, Counselor. Humans have been observed. They are fragile. Their systems are small. Their influence negligible. Bring the envoy." The human arrived not with an army, not with threats, but in a single sleek craft, gliding quietly into the docking bay of Valera's flagship. From the moment he stepped onto the marble floors, he seemed calm, composed, unshaken by the vastness of the chamber or the weight of authority that pressed down from every corner. His uniform was simple, practical, and surprisingly plain compared to the elaborate garb of the alien council. Marcus was his name, and he walked with a confidence that came not from intimidation, but from conviction. Valera observed him carefully, noticing how he carried himself, how his eyes scanned the chamber without fear or arrogance. Most species trembled under her gaze, yet this human stood firmly, shoulders straight, eyes meeting hers directly. It was, she thought, almost entertaining. "You are the human who claims reason over fear," Valera said, her voice echoing across the chamber. "Explain yourself." Marcus inclined his head slightly. "I am Marcus," he said, his voice steady. "I am here not to fight, not to demand, but to show that humans have a way of solving problems without conquest. I request the opportunity to speak with you, Empress, to explain why our methods may be valuable to you and your empire." The council murmured, startled. Rarely did a species enter her domain with such assurance. Even more unusual was his offer, not submission, not flattery, but reason. Valera's eyes flicked to her advisors, who were clearly unsure how to respond. "You have one chance," she said finally. "Convince me, or you leave with nothing but your pride." Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the weight of her words. Then he began to speak. At first it was calm, almost quiet, but there was a rhythm to his words that drew attention. He spoke of humanity's history, of survival against odds that were often impossible, of cooperation between people who might never meet, yet found ways to achieve what no single individual could. He spoke of crises averted not by force, but by negotiation, by creativity, by empathy. The council shifted uncomfortably. These were concepts foreign to them. Power, control, fear, these were the currencies they understood. Yet Marcus spoke of influence through ideas, through trust, through the ability to inspire. He told stories of humans who had negotiated peace between warring factions, of engineers who built solutions that preserved life rather than destroying it, of leaders who guided entire communities through calamities with little more than understanding and vision. Valera listened in silence. She expected foolishness or begging or defiance, but what she saw was neither. It was intelligence tempered with calm, confidence without arrogance, and though she would never admit it aloud, there was a flicker of intrigue. "Humans are clever," she finally said, her tone neutral. "But cleverness does not sway power. It does not move fleets or change worlds. Explain how reasoning will protect a planet or yourself from a decision already made." Marcus smiled faintly, though not in mockery. "It does not protect by brute force, Your Majesty. It protects by showing that cooperation, understanding, and planning can achieve stability far beyond conquest. If you give humanity a chance, the neutral planet can thrive, your empire can benefit, and no resources are wasted on conflict." Valera's gaze hardened. She had heard similar words from lesser species who promised loyalty in exchange for survival. They all failed. Marcus, however, presented facts, scenarios, outcomes. There was no plea, no fear in his tone, only reason. "And what if I choose to ignore your reasoning?" she asked, her voice icy. "What if I take the planet regardless?" "Then you risk rebellion," Marcus replied evenly. "Not just from humans, but from the other systems who will see the injustice. Humans are small, yes, but when systems are united, when reason guides them, even the most powerful fleets can face challenges without a single shot being fired." The council gasped quietly. Such a statement was bold, perhaps even insulting. Valera raised a hand, silencing them. "Bold," she murmured. "I will give you a test, not to destroy you, but to see if your claims hold true. Tomorrow you will oversee a simulation. You will resolve a crisis involving 3 systems, each with competing needs. If you succeed, I may consider your reasoning. If you fail—" her eyes were sharp as daggers. "You will leave and the planet will be mine." Marcus inclined his head. "I accept." The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Valera watched him move through the corridors, unnoticed by many but observed by her at every step. He spoke to her staff politely, efficiently, and without any attempt to curry favor. It was unusual. She found herself curious about how a species so small, so seemingly fragile, could display such confidence. Night fell across the stars, though aboard the flagship lights never dimmed and the hum of engines never ceased. Valera stood by the observation deck, watching the galaxy unfold. She thought of the humans she had studied before. They were chaotic, unpredictable, stubborn. Yet this one human, Marcus, displayed an order and composure she could not dismiss. Her advisors approached carefully, aware of the unspoken question lingering in the chamber. "Your Majesty," one whispered, "he is different. Perhaps we should reconsider." Valera held up a hand. "No," she said, her voice final. "We watch, we wait. Observe and judge only when the test is complete." Hours passed. The galaxy spun outside the massive windows, worlds alight with life, and yet within the flagship, tension simmered like an unspoken storm. Valera's mind, usually so certain, now entertained questions she rarely allowed herself to consider. What if humans were more than they seemed? What if their strength lay not in fleets or weapons, but in something subtler, more dangerous even than power itself? The thought intrigued her, though she would never admit it. When the human finally retired for the night, he did so without ceremony, without guards, without fanfare. Yet the ripple of his presence remained. Valera returned to her quarters, pacing slowly. She thought of the empire she had built, of the fear she had cultivated, and of the rules she had never bent. And for the first time in many cycles, she wondered if fear alone was enough to maintain order. Tomorrow, the test would begin. And perhaps, she realized quietly, humanity might teach her something she had never learned from conquest or obedience. The stars outside remained endless, vast, and indifferent, yet within the chamber of the Empress, a small, unexpected seed of curiosity had taken root. The morning light filtered through the tall, curved windows of Valera's flagship, casting pale streaks across the polished floors. Outside, distant stars shimmered faintly, like pinpricks of silver scattered across the dark void. Within the council chamber, the air was thick with tension. Advisors shifted nervously in their seats, the hum of the flagship's engines echoing softly beneath the conversations. Today was not an ordinary day in the Empire. It was the day of the humans' test. Marcus entered the chamber with calm precision, his movements unhurried, yet deliberate. There was no fear in his posture, no hesitation in his steps. He carried only a small data pad, a simple device filled with simulations and projections of systems and resources. The council looked at him with skepticism, muttering quietly among themselves. They had expected chaos, bluster, perhaps even a bribe or desperate plea. Instead, this human arrived with quiet confidence, as though he were already certain of the outcome. Valera observed him from her high dais, her pale eyes calculating. She had studied humans before, but Marcus was different. His confidence was not born from arrogance. It was not born from strength or intimidation. It was born from reason. And that made him dangerous in a way she had not considered. "Begin," she commanded, her voice echoing through the chamber. "Show me why your species deserves consideration." Marcus approached the central holographic table. 3 systems appeared in shimmering blue projections, each with planets that had competing needs, resources, protection, and trade routes. The challenge was simple in words but complex in execution. These systems were interdependent yet fragile. One wrong move could spark a crisis that rippled across dozens of planets. "Your Majesty, counselors," Marcus began, his voice steady, "each system has needs, strengths, and weaknesses. My task is to find solutions that do not rely on conflict, coercion, or domination. Instead, I aim to show that cooperation can achieve stability and growth for all involved." A ripple of disbelief ran through the council. Cooperation? Growth? In their world, such ideals were considered naive. Strength, power, and fear were the currencies that mattered. But Valera, though outwardly calm, leaned forward slightly. She wanted to see this human fail, yet a small part of her could not deny curiosity. The first scenario appeared: a planet rich in water but poor in food resources, neighboring a planet abundant in minerals but suffering drought. Normally, an empire would seize control, impose its will, and redistribute as it saw fit. Marcus paused, studying the projections. His fingers moved over the data pad, sending holograms of trade routes, supply chains, and transport logistics into the air above the table. "Water can be exchanged for minerals," he explained. "If both planets agree, they can create a partnership that strengthens both systems. Human mediators ensure that agreements are fair and sustainable. No coercion is needed, and both civilizations benefit." Valera's eyebrows rose imperceptibly. She had never considered that a species could solve problems without a show of force. Her advisors whispered nervously, some dismissive, some skeptical, but Marcus continued. The second scenario involved a system on the brink of internal unrest. Civil disputes had left cities divided, with factions unwilling to cooperate. An empire would typically impose martial law, disband the factions, and enforce compliance through fear. Marcus's solution was different. "Instead of imposing authority, we introduce collaboration councils," he said. Representatives from each faction work together under guidance to find common ground. Humans have experience in such mediation. It takes time, patience, and dialogue, but the results are lasting. The holographic projection showed factions meeting, negotiating, and eventually agreeing on shared projects: energy stations, schools, and trade centers. The council members gasped as they watched the simulations unfold. Valera remained silent, her pale eyes fixed on the images, but she felt a subtle shift in her perception. The third scenario was the most challenging. It involved an interstellar trade dispute where 2 planets competed for a rare resource essential for both. Normally, empires would conquer or enforce trade laws favorable to themselves. Marcus, however, approached it differently. "We can create a balanced market," he said, showing graphs and projections. "By regulating supply and demand and allowing both planets to negotiate within set parameters, the resource is shared without conflict. Transparency builds trust. Trust prevents future disputes. This is the human approach." Valera's lips tightened. She was impressed, though she would never admit it. The human had not used threats, manipulation, or force. Yet the outcomes he demonstrated were undeniably effective. Stability, prosperity, and cooperation, all achieved without a single act of aggression. Hours passed as Marcus guided the council through the scenarios. At each turn, he anticipated challenges and offered reasoned solutions. He demonstrated that humans excelled at strategy not through intimidation, but through understanding. By the time the simulation concluded, the chamber was silent, save for the soft hum of the holograms fading away. Valera stood, her posture regal, her face still composed but thoughtful. "You have shown skill," she said finally. "Yet skill alone does not grant respect. It does not change the laws of power. Tell me, why should I value reason over control?" Marcus met her gaze without flinching. "Because reason lasts. Fear can control for a time, but it breeds rebellion, distrust, and inefficiency. Reason builds loyalty, cooperation, and prosperity. A ruler who understands this can achieve more than fleets or weapons ever could." Valera considered his words carefully. She had ruled through fear for countless cycles, and yet she could not deny the logic in his argument. There was a power in reason, subtle but undeniable, that no fleet or weapon could match. Her counsel shifted nervously, sensing the change in their empress. They had never seen her pause in contemplation, never seen her weigh something so carefully without immediate judgment. Marcus, however, remained calm, as though he had expected this all along. "Tomorrow," Valera said after a long silence, "you will accompany me to the neutral planet. We will observe the humans' methods firsthand. If they prove as effective in reality as they have in simulation, perhaps there is merit in your reasoning." Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I assure you the humans' approach is not just theory. It works in practice." The next day, the journey to the neutral planet was uneventful but tense. Valera watched Marcus quietly, noting how he moved among her staff, speaking politely, answering questions without condescension, yet never losing authority in his calm demeanor. Even the advisors who had doubted him began to observe, curious despite themselves. When they arrived, the planet's surface came into view: lush forests, vibrant cities, and a network of settlements that seemed to thrive naturally. It was a planet untouched by conquest, yet orderly and prosperous in ways Valera had not anticipated. Humans and other species coexisted, trading resources, sharing technology, and maintaining peace without coercion. Valera's eyes narrowed as she observed the human methods in action. Marcus guided negotiations between factions, mediated disputes over resources, and suggested cooperative projects that benefited everyone. His words were simple but effective, and the results were immediate. Communities worked together, conflicts dissolved, and efficiency increased. Valera's advisors muttered among themselves, some impressed, others uneasy. They had never seen a species operate with such subtle strength. The humans' power lay not in weapons, not in fleets, but in intellect, empathy, and strategy. They could achieve outcomes more lasting than fear or force ever could. As the day ended, Valera stood on a balcony overlooking the planet. Marcus joined her, silent for a moment, watching the cities below. "You see, Your Majesty," he said softly, "humans solve problems without destruction. That is our strength." Valera said nothing at first, lost in thought. She had always believed that power was absolute and unquestionable. Yet today, she had witnessed a different kind of power, one that commanded respect without fear, one that inspired loyalty through reason rather than intimidation. "Perhaps," she murmured almost to herself, "there is something to your methods." Marcus smiled faintly. "Perhaps, Your Majesty, and if you allow it, humans can show your empire what true cooperation can achieve." Valera turned to look at him fully for the first time, her expression unreadable. She had ruled without mercy for so long that she had forgotten the value of patience, understanding, and subtle influence. Marcus had reminded her that strength came in many forms, and that even a ruler could learn something new, no matter how vast their empire. The stars outside continued to shine, indifferent to the events below, yet within the chamber of the Empress, a quiet shift was taking place. A seed of curiosity had been planted, a small recognition that humans, this one human, might teach her something she could never learn from fear or power alone. As the sun set on the neutral planet, casting golden light over its thriving cities, Valera realized that the test was not over. It had only begun. Marcus had shown her the potential, but the real proof would come as the humans' methods spread, touching lives and systems in ways she had never imagined. For the first time in many cycles, Valera felt something unfamiliar, a sense of possibility. She did not yet understand what the future held, but she knew one thing clearly: humans were not as fragile or insignificant as she had believed. They were different. They were clever, and they were capable of changing the course of worlds without a single act of violence. The neutral planet stretched below them, a swirling mosaic of forests, rivers, and cities, each humming with life. From the observation deck of the Empress's flagship, Valera watched silently, her expression unreadable. Marcus stood beside her, calm and poised, as he had been since the beginning of this mission. He had already begun guiding the planet's local leaders in ways that would have taken Valera's empire months or even cycles to organize. Yet he did it with quiet patience, never raising his voice, never forcing anyone to act against their will. Valera had seen power wielded through fear countless times. Entire planets bent under her commands, fleets obeyed without question, and the smallest defiance was crushed swiftly. Yet here was a human, achieving more in hours than empires accomplished in years, without a single display of force. She frowned slightly, feeling an unfamiliar tension in her chest, a mixture of curiosity and unease. Marcus had arranged a meeting in one of the planet's major cities. Leaders from multiple systems, human and alien alike, gathered around a central holographic display. They argued at first, each insisting their priorities mattered most. The air was thick with tension, yet Marcus moved among them, speaking quietly to individuals, listening intently and suggesting compromises. Slowly, the room began to change. Voices softened. Eyes met. Heads nodded. "Your resources are limited, but your needs are urgent," Marcus said, addressing the leader of a water-rich planet. "If you share your water with your neighbors and in exchange receive minerals and agricultural assistance, your system becomes stronger, not weaker. Cooperation builds resilience." The leader hesitated, clearly accustomed to commanding through threats or dominance. Marcus leaned slightly forward, his tone steady, persuasive, but never demanding. "I am not asking for surrender. I am asking for understanding. If your neighbors thrive, your system thrives too. You will not lose your authority, you will strengthen it." Valera watched in silence, noting how the human's calm reasoning disarmed suspicion. The council members from her empire, normally impatient with such displays of negotiation, whispered among themselves, some incredulous, some thoughtful. Marcus had taken what should have been a chaotic standoff and transformed it into a dialogue that promised solutions, stability, and mutual benefit. By midday, the first agreements were made. Water and minerals would be shared, trade routes established, and disputes mediated under Marcus's guidance. The leaders, once skeptical, began to recognize the wisdom of his approach. A fragile alliance was forming, one that could grow into something lasting and resilient. Valera could feel her advisors' unease. They were accustomed to speed, control, and obedience. Here was a human demonstrating that patience, empathy, and reason could accomplish more than fleets or laws ever had. Her pale eyes followed Marcus as he moved to the next challenge, a series of small settlements on the planet's outskirts where infrastructure was failing and supplies were unevenly distributed. Instead of issuing commands or delegating enforcement, Marcus asked questions. He listened to the local leaders describe their struggles, their fears, and their hopes. Then he suggested solutions that leveraged the unique strengths of each community, encouraging collaboration between settlements. Roads, energy grids, and communication systems could be built jointly, rather than imposed from above. Slowly, the settlements began to cooperate, organizing themselves in ways that were efficient, fair, and mutually beneficial. Valera's curiosity deepened. She had expected humans to be fragile, disorganized, or selfish. Yet this human, and his species by extension, had a kind of quiet intelligence she had never seen before. They solved problems not by dominating or coercing, but by understanding, reasoning, and inspiring others to act in ways that benefited everyone. The sun was high when Marcus moved to the final test of the day, a resource dispute between two neighboring systems, each claiming ownership of a rare mineral critical for energy production. Historically, empires would have seized control of the resource, enforced strict laws, or punished the weaker system. Marcus, however, took a different approach. "Your resource is valuable to both your systems," he said to the leaders. "Instead of fighting, we can create a shared system where both benefit equally. If you communicate openly, plan distribution together, and establish oversight councils, the mineral can sustain both your populations and prevent future conflict." He paused, letting the idea settle. "This will require trust. Trust takes time, but it lasts. Fear lasts only as long as the threat remains." The leaders looked at each other uncertainly. Marcus spoke to them individually, explaining, reasoning, and listening. By the end of the day, they had agreed to a shared resource plan, a council to oversee fairness, and schedules to distribute the mineral. The planet, which had begun as a place of potential chaos, now had the framework for long-term stability and prosperity, all achieved without aggression, without coercion, without a single shot fired. Valera remained silent, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had seen humans in simulations, but seeing them in practice, guiding real civilizations, achieving outcomes she had always thought required domination, challenged everything she had known. "Impressive," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "You have done what most empires could not, and all without a fleet, without laws, without fear." Marcus inclined his head. "That is the human way, Your Majesty. Strength is not always visible. Sometimes the greatest power lies in understanding and influencing without forcing." Valera considered his words carefully. For cycles, she had believed fear was the only true path to obedience, control, and survival. Humans had shown her otherwise. Their power was subtle, patient, yet far-reaching. It was a force she had never learned to wield, but one she could not ignore. The human methods continued to unfold over the next several cycles on the planet. Marcus helped establish trade networks, energy projects, and cooperative governance systems. Conflicts that once seemed inevitable dissolved through dialogue and understanding. Communities that had been isolated began working together. Prosperity spread quietly but unmistakably. Valera observed all of this from the flagship, occasionally walking among Marcus and the planetary leaders. She noted the way he spoke, how he treated mistakes not as failures to punish, but as opportunities to learn. He never demanded loyalty, he inspired it. Slowly, she realized that humans were not fragile. They were resilient, adaptable, and clever in ways that her empire had rarely encountered. Her advisors grew increasingly uneasy. "Your Majesty," one whispered, "he is teaching them and they are listening." "This could undermine your authority if it spreads too far." Valera's gaze was sharp yet thoughtful. "Perhaps," she said quietly. "Or perhaps it teaches something new about power itself, something I have not considered before." That night, Valera walked alone on the observation deck, looking down at the planet below. Cities glowed softly in the darkness, energy grids connected distant settlements, and small lights traced the routes of trade ships moving quietly between systems. She could see the results of Marcus's guidance in real time, and it unsettled her in ways she could not fully name. Marcus joined her, standing a respectful distance away. "The planet is adapting," he said simply. "It is thriving because the people have the chance to solve problems themselves, guided by reason. Fear is unnecessary when understanding exists." Valera did not respond immediately. She was thinking of her empire, of the countless systems ruled through intimidation, of the obedience she demanded and the fear she cultivated. What would happen if such methods were applied to her empire? Could reason, patience, and cooperation achieve what fear never had? "Perhaps it could," she admitted softly, almost to herself. "But it is unfamiliar and uncomfortable." Marcus smiled faintly, as if expecting her honesty. "Unfamiliar does not mean impossible, Your Majesty. Humans succeed precisely because they do not rely on fear. They rely on thought, planning, and understanding." Valera's pale eyes drifted back to the glowing cities below. She had always believed that control required domination, that fear was the only reliable method. But now, watching humans solve complex problems without aggression, she felt a shift within herself. A seed of curiosity had grown, and with it, a flicker of respect. The night passed slowly, but Valera did not sleep. She reflected on everything she had witnessed, replaying Marcus's words, observing the systems he had guided, and considering what it might mean for her own empire. For the first time, she entertained a question she had never asked herself. Could power be wielded differently? Could influence come from reason, not fear? Could a ruler achieve obedience through respect, not terror? By dawn, she had no answers, only possibilities. Marcus stood ready to continue guiding the planet, patient as ever. The leaders, now cooperative, awaited his direction with trust rather than dread. The planet was alive with energy and potential, thriving not because of force, but because of understanding. Valera realized something profound. The human approach could reshape more than this single planet. It could challenge the very foundation of how empires were built, how authority was maintained, and how power was measured. Valera stood in the observation deck of her flagship, her pale eyes tracing the movement of trade ships, supply convoys, and small fleets moving quietly across the neutral planet below. The planet had changed in ways that were both subtle and undeniable. Where once there had been tension and conflict, there was now organization, collaboration, and quiet efficiency. The change was not enforced by fleets or laws, but by the method of one human, Marcus, whose calm reasoning had begun to ripple outward in ways she had not anticipated. Her advisors gathered nearby, their faces betraying a mix of awe and unease. "Your Majesty," one began hesitantly, "the humans, their influence is spreading faster than anticipated. Local leaders are coordinating independently, making decisions without our interference. This could undermine imperial authority." Valera did not respond immediately. She was not angry, nor was she alarmed in the traditional sense. Instead, a strange feeling lingered, a combination of intrigue and unease, as if the universe had revealed a new way of thinking that she had never considered. For cycles, she had ruled through fear, and yet here was proof that obedience and cooperation could be achieved through reason, patience, and trust. "Let them observe," Valera said finally, her voice calm but decisive. "We are here to learn, not to intervene." The human, Marcus, moved among the planetary leaders with the same steady composure he had shown from the beginning. He addressed disputes, negotiated compromises, and encouraged collaboration without ever asserting dominance. Valera watched as even the most stubborn leaders, alien and human alike, adjusted their positions to accommodate each other. There was no coercion, no threats, only understanding and guidance. It was remarkable, Valera thought. The human did not command through fear or punishment. He guided through reason, example, and careful planning. The results were undeniable. Systems that had been unstable were now thriving, disputes that had seemed unresolvable were resolved, and communities that had been isolated were forming networks of trade, communication, and mutual support. Her advisors exchanged worried glances. "Your Majesty, if this spreads to other systems," one whispered, "it could change the entire perception of human influence. Others may follow their methods, ignoring our authority." Valera's gaze remained fixed on the planet below. "Perhaps that is not a weakness," she said quietly. "Perhaps it is a strength we have yet to understand." By midday, Marcus had organized the planet into a framework that allowed for ongoing collaboration and problem-solving. He trained local leaders to continue the work without his constant presence, ensuring that the systems could operate independently while maintaining stability. Valera observed silently, noting the careful attention to detail, the patience, and the consistent logic guiding every decision. It was a methodical approach, yet it achieved more than force or intimidation ever could. Valera began to walk among her advisors, questioning them quietly. "Do you see? The systems are thriving, productivity is higher, conflicts are fewer, loyalty is not coerced, it is earned. Could this not be applied to the empire itself?" Her words caused a stir. Advisors who had always advocated strict enforcement were unsettled. They had never considered that a ruler could maintain authority without instilling fear. Valera continued, her voice steady, almost contemplative. "I have ruled through fear for many cycles. It is effective, yes, but it is limited. Humans demonstrate a different path. Perhaps it is time we consider other ways to maintain strength and stability." The council fell silent. They had seen the results firsthand and could not deny the truth of her words. Marcus had shown them a system of influence that was both powerful and subtle, one that could reach far beyond the scope of fleets, weapons, or laws. Valera's curiosity grew with every passing hour. As the day progressed, reports reached them of minor conflicts being resolved independently by local councils, using methods Marcus had taught. Systems previously considered unreliable were now self-regulating, adapting to challenges without external intervention. The human methods were spreading organically, a quiet revolution of reason and cooperation. Valera realized that this was the turning point. The strength of humans lay not in dominance, not in sheer force, but in the ability to influence, guide, and inspire others to achieve outcomes that even the most powerful empire could not impose by law alone. She began to test her own reactions. She observed Marcus, watched his interactions, listened to his reasoning, and began to ask herself questions she had never dared before. Could her empire operate on principles of collaboration rather than fear? Could she maintain authority while allowing systems to grow independently? Could she guide without commanding, influence without intimidation? Marcus's calm demeanor and unwavering logic challenged her assumptions at every turn. Where she expected resistance or failure, she saw solutions. Where she expected chaos, she saw order emerging naturally. It was a revelation that unsettled her as much as it intrigued her. By evening, Valera decided to accompany Marcus on a tour of one of the newly organized trade routes. She wanted to witness firsthand how humans applied their methods in practice, not just in theory. As they moved along the route, she observed communities exchanging resources efficiently, resolving minor disputes without intervention, and coordinating projects that improved life across multiple settlements. "What do you see?" Marcus asked quietly, noticing her attention. Valera considered her response. "I see efficiency, I see cooperation, I see loyalty earned through understanding rather than fear, and I see a method that could reshape an entire empire if applied correctly." Marcus nodded. "That is the human approach. We do not rely on fear because it is temporary. We rely on understanding, planning, and shared purpose. It lasts longer than threats, and it spreads more effectively than fleets." Valera reflected on this, thinking of her own empire where obedience was often grudging, loyalty was conditional, and fear was the primary motivator. Humans had demonstrated a different kind of power, one that was subtle, patient, and ultimately more enduring. Back aboard the flagship, Valera gathered her advisors for a private council. "We have observed the humans' methods in practice," she said. "They are effective. They achieve stability without fleets or laws, without coercion or punishment. Perhaps it is time to consider whether our reliance on fear is truly the most effective approach." The council was divided. Some saw the potential, while others feared the unknown. Valera listened to each opinion carefully, weighing the arguments. She did not dismiss fear, but she began to understand that reason and cooperation could achieve outcomes beyond the reach of intimidation alone. As the day drew to a close, Valera returned to the observation deck. Marcus joined her, standing quietly beside her as she gazed down at the thriving planet. "You have shown me much," she said softly. "More than I expected and more than I have seen in many cycles of rule. Humans, your methods are powerful in ways I did not understand." Marcus smiled faintly. "Power comes in many forms, Your Majesty. It is not always visible, and it is not always loud. Sometimes the greatest strength is patience, understanding, and guiding others to see possibilities they did not know existed." Valera considered his words. For the first time in cycles, she felt the weight of curiosity outweigh the certainty of fear. She realized that the methods she had relied upon for so long, strict laws, fleets, intimidation, were not the only path to influence. Humans had shown her a different kind of strength, one that could reshape empires quietly, effectively, and enduringly. Over the following cycles, Valera continued to observe Marcus and the planet below. She saw minor conflicts resolved without imperial intervention, trade networks expanding efficiently, and communities growing stronger through cooperation. The humans' influence spread naturally, quietly, yet undeniably. Valera began to think about her own empire. Could these methods be applied beyond a single planet? Could she inspire loyalty and cooperation across systems without relying solely on fear? The idea was both exciting and unsettling. She had ruled through intimidation for so long that the concept of guiding through understanding felt almost foreign. Yet the evidence before her was undeniable. Humans could achieve what empires often could not, and they did it without violence. As the stars glimmered outside, Valera realized that the turning point had arrived. She could continue ruling as she always had, relying on fleets and fear, or she could learn from humans and explore a new path, one that relied on reason, empathy, and the subtle influence of understanding. Marcus stood quietly beside her, a calm presence amid the swirl of her thoughts. "The choice is yours, Your Majesty," he said softly. "Humans do not seek to dominate. We seek to show what is possible when reason guides action. The rest is up to you." Valera nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words. She had always believed that power required fear. Humans had shown her otherwise. And now, she realized, she had the opportunity to test a new form of leadership, one that could change not only a single planet but potentially the entire empire. The stars outside continued to shine, indifferent and eternal, Yet within the observation deck, a quiet revolution of thought had begun. Valara, once merciless and unyielding, felt a shift within herself, a recognition that strength could take many forms, and that humans, in their quiet, reasoned way, had taught her the first lesson. And for the first time, she wondered if the empire she had built could thrive not through fear alone, but through understanding, cooperation, and the subtle, enduring power of reason. The neutral planet had changed. Where tension had once hung like a shadow over its cities, there was now movement, cooperation, and quiet energy. Trade networks stretched across settlements. Resources were shared fairly, and communities worked together in ways Valara had never imagined possible. All of it had been achieved not by threats or punishment, but by the guidance of one human, Marcus, and the principles he represented. Valara stood in the observation chamber of her flagship, looking down at the planet below. The glow of its cities reflected in her pale eyes, and for the first time in cycles, she felt a mixture of wonder and respect. She had spent years building an empire on fear, control, and obedience, yet here was proof that influence could be wielded in a different, more lasting way. Marcus joined her, his presence calm and steady. "The systems are stable," he said simply. "They can continue without direct oversight. The structures we've built allow them to solve problems on their own while remaining connected and cooperative." Valara nodded slowly. "You have done more than I thought possible," she admitted. "Without fleets, without laws, without force, you have reshaped an entire planet." Marcus inclined his head, quiet and modest. "That is the human way. Strength is often hidden. Influence does not require fear. Cooperation can achieve results that intimidation cannot." Valara's mind raced as she considered her own empire, the countless worlds under her control, the fleets at her command, and the systems maintained through obedience rather than loyalty. She realized that fear could only go so far, but understanding, reason, and cooperation could reach farther than she had ever imagined. Her advisors, who had followed her quietly, now waited, unsure of what she might decide. Some whispered doubts, fearful that acknowledging human methods could undermine centuries of rule. Others, however, could not deny the evidence before them. The humans' approach had worked. It had stabilized a planet, created networks of trade and governance, and fostered loyalty without coercion. Valara turned to them, her expression calm but resolute. "We have seen what humans can do," she said. "They demonstrate a power different from fleets and armies. Their methods achieve results beyond fear alone. Perhaps it is time for us to learn from them." The council fell silent. This was unprecedented. The Empress, once merciless and unyielding, was considering a new approach to ruling her empire. The possibility was both thrilling and unnerving, yet Valara's resolve was clear. Marcus led the next steps with the same quiet patience he had shown from the beginning. He helped establish councils for trade and governance, ensured communication between settlements, and guided local leaders to solve disputes before they escalated. Valara observed, learning not through instruction but through watching, noting how humans could influence without forcing, guide without dominating, and inspire without demanding. Over cycles, the results were undeniable. The planet flourished. Productivity increased, disputes decreased, and communities that had once been isolated now thrived together. Even Valara's advisors, initially skeptical, could not deny the effectiveness of Marcus's methods. They whispered among themselves, acknowledging quietly that humans had shown them something remarkable. Valara realized that this was not simply a lesson for a single planet, but for her entire empire. Fear had its place, but reason, cooperation, and understanding could achieve more than fleets or laws ever could. The idea of applying these methods across her systems filled her with both excitement and challenge. She began to plan. Instead of relying solely on intimidation, she could introduce principles of cooperation, guided leadership, and strategic influence. She could maintain authority while empowering others to solve problems, creating a network of loyalty built on respect rather than fear. Marcus remained at her side through all of this, calm, patient, and observant. He did not seek glory or recognition. His goal was simply to demonstrate that humanity's approach worked. Valara found herself respecting not just his intelligence, but his integrity and subtle influence. One evening, as the planet's twin suns set, casting gold and violet light across the cities, Valara walked with Marcus along one of the observation corridors. She paused to look down at a bustling trade hub, where humans and aliens worked side by side, negotiating exchanges, sharing knowledge, and resolving minor disputes with ease. "It is remarkable," she said quietly. "To see this happen without my fleets enforcing law, without my command, without fear. I have never imagined such a method could succeed." Marcus smiled faintly. "It succeeds because it allows others to think, to act, and to contribute. Fear can maintain control, but only reason inspires progress." Valera nodded, deep in thought. She had ruled through fear for cycles, believing it was the only way to maintain order. Now, watching humans guide entire civilizations with logic, patience, and empathy, she realized that her empire could thrive in ways she had never imagined. She returned to the council the next day and addressed her advisors. "We have observed the humans' methods. They have proven themselves effective. We can apply similar principles in our empire, ensuring stability and prosperity without relying solely on fear. Authority does not require intimidation. It requires understanding, guidance, and trust." The council was stunned. This was a radical departure from everything they had known. Some resisted the idea, fearing it would undermine centuries of control. Others, however, saw the potential, recognizing that humans had demonstrated results impossible to ignore. Valera continued, "I am not abandoning strength. We will maintain fleets, laws, and security. But we will also incorporate reason, collaboration, and guidance. We will empower others to solve problems, create loyalty through respect, and influence through wisdom rather than fear alone." The council listened in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. Valera's empire had survived and thrived through strict rule for cycles, but now a new path had opened, one where intelligence, patience, and cooperation could complement strength. Over the following cycles, Valera began implementing the lessons she had learned from Marcus. Systems were encouraged to develop self-governing councils, trade networks expanded efficiently, and disputes were mediated with guidance rather than punishment. Fleets remained as symbols of security, but their presence became secondary to reasoned leadership. Reports reached Valera of planets functioning effectively on their own, without constant oversight. Leaders who had once relied on fear now responded to guidance, advice, and reason. Efficiency improved, disputes declined, and loyalty grew naturally. The empire was becoming stronger, more adaptable, and more resilient than ever before. Valera observed these changes quietly, taking satisfaction in the results. She realized that Marcus had taught her something profound. True strength did not always lie in domination. Influence could be exercised subtly, decisions could inspire rather than coerce, and loyalty could be earned without fear. Humans had shown her that the most enduring power was not that which forced obedience, but that which inspired collaboration. As the neutral planet continued to flourish under Marcus's guidance, Valera made a decision. She would invite him to serve as a consultant to her empire, not as a subordinate, but as an advisor, a teacher, and a guide. Humanity's methods could be scaled, adapted, and applied across her systems, ensuring a lasting stability and prosperity that fear alone could never achieve. Marcus accepted the offer with quiet humility. "I am here to show what is possible," he said. "The rest is up to you, Your Majesty." Valera reflected on the journey. She had begun this mission certain of her methods, unyielding in her rule and confident in the power of fear. She had expected humans to be insignificant, weak, and unremarkable. Instead, she had discovered intelligence, patience, and subtle strength beyond anything she had encountered. The empire was changing, quietly and steadily. Leaders were learning to guide rather than command. Communities were learning to cooperate rather than compete. Systems were growing stronger through reason rather than intimidation. And at the center of it all, Valera was learning a new kind of leadership, one that balanced strength with wisdom, power with understanding, and authority with guidance. One evening, standing on the observation deck with Marcus, Valera watched the stars shimmer across the black expanse of space. She thought of her empire, of the countless worlds under her rule, and of the lessons humanity had taught her. "You have shown me much," she said softly. "Perhaps more than I was prepared to see." Marcus inclined his head. "Power takes many forms, Your Majesty. Influence through fear is temporary. Influence through understanding endures. Humans have long relied on reason, patience, and cooperation to achieve results." You have the opportunity to apply these lessons to your empire, to create a future that thrives beyond what fear alone can achieve. Valera considered his words. For the first time, she understood that strength did not require cruelty. Obedience could be earned without intimidation, and authority could inspire rather than demand. She had ruled without mercy for cycles, but now she had learned that mercy, when combined with wisdom and guidance, could achieve far more than fear ever had. The neutral planet below continued to prosper, a living testament to the human approach. Marcus had not conquered, coerced, or demanded. He had guided, reasoned, and inspired. And in doing so, he had reshaped not only the planet but the perspective of an entire empire. Valera smiled faintly, a rare and quiet expression of satisfaction. The empress who once ruled through fear had begun to understand a new form of power, a power that combined wisdom, patience, and the subtle, enduring influence of reason. Humans had shown her what was possible. And now the empire itself would grow stronger, not through domination, but through understanding, cooperation, and the remarkable methods of a species once thought insignificant. The stars outside continued to shine, vast and indifferent, yet within the chamber of the Empress, a quiet transformation had taken place. Valera, once merciless and unyielding, had learned that true strength was not only in command, but in guidance, and that the human way, patient, clever, and cooperative, could reshape the future in ways she had never imagined. And for the first time in cycles, Valera felt a sense of hope, possibility, and admiration. Humanity had proven itself, not with fleets, weapons, or intimidation, but with reason, understanding, and the power to inspire.